Welcome to lesson 7 of Learn Biblical Hebrew. Today we take a verse out of Psalm 124. Psalm 124, verse 8. So here it is, Psalm 124, verse 8. Ezrenu b'shem Yahweh, oseh shamayim wa'aretz. Psalm 124 verse 8. So I think we have a couple of new letters here. This one we met in the last lesson. This one is new. It's a Hebrew Z. And I think this one too is new. It's an N. And we met the sh, which has the dot here, but this is a s, which has a dot on this side. So when the dot above is on the right side, we pronounce it sh, and when the dot above is on the left side, we just pronounce it like an ordinary S. So here's our letter by letter. Now, I think when I did Shamayim from Genesis 1:1, I omitted this Y. It's always a little bit confusing because the Y and the W, sometimes they're consonants, so we have to write them as Y and W, but sometimes they're only there to represent a vowel. So here we have the W here, but it's not really a W, it's just written to represent a vowel. This happened because the first Hebrew text that was handed down had no vowels at all. Then sometime later, a few hundred years later, some scribes started to use the W and the Y to represent vowels. And then sometime after that, the later scribes added all these other symbols so as to represent every vowel. So it can be a little bit confusing sometimes to know whether the W and the Y represent vowels or consonants. But I suppose we have the same thing in English. Hymn, H-Y-M-N, there's a Y representing a vowel, but yodel, there's a Y which is a consonant. So we have a similar sort of thing in English. So yes, there we have it, a little messily written. Oh, another little point here, I write TS for this letter, but some people write TZ. You might see the famous Israeli newspaper Haaretz, and they write it TZ, and they don't indicate the Aleph at all. They just write H-A-A-R-E-T-Z. So that there are different ways of translating these Hebrew letters into English. So this first word is new, Ezrenu, and Ezer means help, and the nu at the end is a suffix, and it means our. But if you've heard the word Ebenezer, so that Ezer part, Eben means stone, and Ezer means help. Ebenezer is stone of help. But again, in that English transliteration, the letter is lost because we don't have it in English. So they just write Ebenezer like that. Now, here again we have a word with two parts to it. The B means in, and the Shem means name. So that's really two words joined together as one. Next word is also new, ose, which means maker. Shamayim va'aretz. And so we supply an of, maker of earth, heavens and earth. So here's my translation. I've changed it around a little bit in the translation, my translation. God, who made heaven and earth, helps us. So I put this part first and that part second. It seems to flow a little bit better to me in English. But you can do it your way if you like. Now there's an interesting comparison here with Genesis 1:1, which we did a few lessons ago. In Genesis 1:1 we had the special word bara, create, but here we just have the word make, and this is the ordinary word for make or do. The other interesting thing about Genesis 1:1 is that it had hashemayim wa haaretz, the heavens and the earth. But here those are missing. And it also had et, the object marker. Et hashemayim va et haaretz. So all those three things are missing here, which is quite interesting. It raises the question of why. And there have been different suggestions made by commentators. Perhaps the best one to me is that Genesis 1:1 is deliberately made kind of long and a little bit longer, and to make it a bit more sonorous and weighty. So it's kind of drawn out a little bit to make it longer and weighty. But here it's just put in a concise form because there's not so much focus on making that particular comment, but the focus is on the Lord, and He is our help. So this is the real focus on it, and this is incidental. But in Genesis 1:1, where these things were being stated for the first time, they were expressed in a little more sonorous and weighty way. Psalm 124 here is using conciseness to bring out its point. In Genesis 1:1, that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to translate the and the. When you're translating into your own language, you have to make your own decision as to what's better. But again, we have the two conflicting things that always make translation difficult. You have the basic meaning, which you want to express as simply and as clearly as possible, and then on top of that you have different rhetorical methods that are adding sometimes adornment, sometimes gravitas to the translation, and so the translator is in a difficult position, not wanting to make it unclear, but not wanting to make his translation sound too light, unweighty, and a little bit trivial, perhaps. So there we are. Who is our helper? Our helper is the Lord, who made heaven and earth. I just picked up an interesting piece of information from New Scientist magazine. It said, the size of the observable universe is one of the more precisely known quantities in astronomy, but the size of the whole universe is one of the least well known. The data we have implies it's much bigger than just what we can observe. So we don't even know if the whole universe is finite or infinite. And another suggestion is it's like the surface of a four-dimensional sphere. On the surface of a three-dimensional sphere, like our Earth, you go in a straight line, it takes you round and back to where you started. So the suggestion is that the universe could be a little bit like that, the surface of a four-dimensional sphere. So you go in a straight line in any direction, and you would eventually, without even realizing it, curl back to where you started. So that's just an interesting point. Not really the main point here, but an interesting incidental point. But the main point here is Ezrenu b'shem Yahweh, Ose Shamayim Va'aretz. Who is our helper? Our helper is God. Oh, and I didn't comment on the word Shem. It says our help is in the name of God. So some translations keep that in. But in Hebrew, the word name has a rather broader meaning than just the English word name, and it can extend to reputation. Well, sometimes the English word extends to reputation. You know, I have a good name or I have a bad name. That's talking about my reputation. But it can also mean just my person, me, just me. So here I think that's really just what it means. It's him who is our helper. But again, perhaps we could say putting the Shem there adds a little bit of weight and a little bit of gravitas to it, which perhaps I've tried to copy a little bit by putting it at the beginning of the sentence in a place of emphasis. God, who made heaven and earth, helps us.